The heat had finally got to her. Once she had cried what felt like all she could cry, she finally moved out of the burning room. Her only path was the exit out of the door the way she came through. She pushed it open, surprisingly cool door, and walked through, closing the door shut behind her. The cool air struck her coat, causing her whole body to feel like a bit of relaxation. As the temperature cooled, she wiped her face, sniffling as she continued to try and regain her composure. Dash's words still had a strong grip on her heart. "I can't stop now." Fluttershy gulped back as more tears were spilling. "I have to move forward." She then looked into the other room, at the other end of the hallway, expecting to see the patient nurse. However, the room wasn't the same one that she just came out of. The room before was a small square room, with a staircase going up before her. Fluttershy blinked at the sight, but the twisting, warping rooms had become something that she was accustomed to by now. She had stepped across the room, quickly reaching out of the staircase. She slowly began to climb upwards, feeling this sense of déjà vu upon the climb. Her hooves nearly slipped on the slick steps of the stench of mildew that hit her nose once more. The water had dripped down and the walls, and she felt like a sense of dread. Suddenly, as she reached the top of the stairwell, she knew where she was. She was back in the cloud home that she had entered from when she was separated from her friends, only it wasn't a random cloud house anymore. It was her home, from when she was a filly. The room she had just entered was her mother's room, from when she was young. The same bed next to the window, she could look out of it. The bookshelf contained all the books she had read in her bed. The bedside table held her personal belongings, a desk and a chair, a bathroom, just a short walk away, everything she needed for a living room while sick. Fluttershy was drawn towards the bed, like a force that was guiding her, telling her to go near it. Her mind felt like a haze when she flew past it. As she stepped back, she saw a fresh blood flash before her eyes, and on her bed on the carpet, as if her mind was trying to reject the images, but there was no stopping them. Her head began to ache with the pain, but she couldn't stop the memories. Her attention was drawn from the bed, as the memories that she had lost track came back in full force, making her remember what happened in that room not so long ago. "Mother?" Fluttershy called out, walking into her mother's room. Her mother sat on the bed, a knife in her hoof as she was playing with it. Her hair was messy, unkempt, and uncared for. Bags were underneath her bloodshot eyes, as she seemed to be glaring at the knife, as if unhappy with it. "Mother?" Fluttershy whimpered, walking further to the room. "Why would you like to eat the... Her mother suddenly burst out laughing. Fluttershy then halted her movements forward, looking up at her mother in shock. The older mare just seemed to have something that funny. "Oh, yes, that will do nicely." The older mare smiled once more. She finished laughing, turning her head to grin at her daughter. Fluttershy couldn't move, afraid of what her mother was about to do. "Come closer, my daughter," her mother said, twisting her body closer to the edge of the bed. Fluttershy began to hesitantly move closer to the bed. "I said close!" Fluttershy's mother began to yell, suddenly fell from the bed, hitting the ground with a thud. "Mother!" Fluttershy cried out as she ran to her mother's side, trying to ensure she was okay. Her mother groaned, but slowly rolled over to the side. She was facing her daughter. Once she could see her face, a wicked smile crawled on her face. "My dearest daughter, oh, you just came at the right time, you see. I finally figured it out. I finally figured out how to cure myself." Her mother let out a short laugh. "Really? Oh, that's good news. I have to tell Father." "No, you can't tell Father yet," her mother hissed. "Well, why not?" Fluttershy asked, confused. "Because only you can administer the right treatment right now." Her mother laughed, carefully holding a knife up to Fluttershy. "And I'll need you to use this to cure me." Fluttershy gingerly took the knife in her hooves, staring at it confused. "I do it myself, but I'm far too weak and administer the treatment properly." "But you could do it just fine." Her mother laughed. "And then just want me to be cured, right? Cured and happy?" "Of course I do, but what do I..." Fluttershy began to ask in confusion, but her mother seemed ready to answer. That's simple, my dear child. You take the knife and you strike me with it. Her mother smiled. Fluttershy froze. That didn't sound right at all. She knew that something as sharp as a knife would hurt when you grazed at its edge, but why striking her mother cured the illness? But mother, that... Are you questioning me? Her mother glared at her. Fluttershy's skin jumped at the glare. No, but that sounds like you're questioning me, her mother growled. If she could move with any decent strength, she'd had smacked her daughter. I need you to do this for me. Only you could do it right now. You do love me, right? That pulled on Fluttershy's heart. Of course I do, mother. Then strike me, her mother demanded. Fluttershy then took a gulp as she shakily raised the knife up to above her head. She didn't want to bring it down. Her mind was telling her doing that was wrong. The knife was hoovered in the air, unable to strike it down. Fluttershy, her mother spoke quietly, coldly. Yes, Fluttershy whimpered, still holding the knife up. You said you loved me, but haven't you struck me with a knife yet? So you lie to me, her mother said bitterly. No, I do. Then strike me, her mother yelled at her, making Fluttershy almost jump. Strike me, love me, you're going to love me. Her mother's head snapped up off of the ground, her mouth open as ready to bite down on Fluttershy. The knife sailed through the air, embedding itself into her mother's side. Her mother's eyes went wide for a moment before a wicked grin returned. Yes, do it again, she demanded with a yell. Fluttershy pulled the knife out and slammed it back down on her mother. Don't stop, were the last words Fluttershy heard from her mother. The knife rose and sank down into her body before her, again and again. Each strike sent blood flying. Her fur was being coated and her mane was drenched. Each strike sounded deafening, yet it was one of the quietest sounds in the world, as if every knife was screaming at her. But she could only hear the screams of the blade. She plunged the knife one last time. She panted and she cried as she shook. Her mother wasn't moving anymore. She wasn't speaking. She wasn't breathing. She wasn't warm anymore. Fluttershy didn't know what this meant. She had cured her mother like she asked? Hadn't she put her through enough of pain? Was she going to be alright? Fluttershy, you haven't got that answer from your mother yet. Her father walked into the room. Fluttershy then slowly turned, tears streaming down her face, still holding the knife covered in her mother's blood, sitting before the corpse of her. The air was silent. Her father drew closer. Fluttershy, Fluttershy hiccuped, trying to say something and anything to explain the sight before her father. However, she was silenced before a hoof struck her hard. Her small body was sent sailing across the room and smashed into the wall. She let out a yelp of pain before hitting the ground. Her father picked up her mother's head in his hoof as he began to cry. Tears streamed down her face. I killed my mother? Fluttershy whimpered. I killed... She cried. She couldn't believe what she had done it. She had done it. All because her mother yelled at her, and because she had been too weak to disobey her mother. Fluttershy felt her stomach twist. She felt like she was going to be sick. She turned and ran into the bathroom, wanting to escape the room for even a moment. However, her brain assaulted her once more of a vision of memories forgotten, appearing before her once more. There was silence as her father scrubbed away at her coat, washing away any blood that had begun to cake onto her fur. The hot water was managing to get most of it away, but some of it was being stubborn. He was being hard with the brush, harder than he had ever been. Fluttershy didn't speak up, though. She couldn't speak up against it. She felt her heart was in a million pieces. Do you know what you've done? Her father finally asked. Fluttershy whimpered in response. She couldn't say any words. You took your mother from us, her father said, as if his breathing was becoming more raged. The brush was stopping its cleaning. You took the most wonderful mare I've ever known out of this world. He gripped at the brush harder as he started to speak through the gritted teeth. You did it so quickly, though. I sent you to help her, and you killed her? Fluttershy's eyes began to burn with tears as her father's words made her heart sting worse. You are a monster, he growled. Without a warning, he pushed her head down to the water. Fluttershy scrambled at the unexpected movement, her mouth and nose filling with water as air escaped her lungs. Her hooves flailed as she tried to push herself out of the water, but the hoof holding her down was too strong. Air escaped her quickly and her lungs began to burn. She reached out for air, but it wouldn't come. Suddenly she was lifted into the air. Instinctively she took a big gasp of air, only for her head to be shoved back in under the water. She lost her air almost instantly again. Her whole body began to feel like it was burning from the movements. This repeated several times, getting a short breath of air, only to have it painfully taken away by water once more. He struggled and had lessened, and now she was too weak to push against the water, too tired to try and get air. The hoof holding her under the water was for good now. Her eyes began to roll back of her head as her limbs stopped moving. She couldn't stay awake any longer. She was pulled out of the water and her body gasped and took in fresh air, before coughing up the water that had filled her lungs. She puked slightly as her body tried to reject any water that attacked her body. No. Just killing you would be too easy, her father growled, watching her sputter and gasp for breath. You need to understand the misery that you've caused with your love. Her father let go of her mane, Fluttershy instinctively catching herself on the edge of the bathtub, still recovering as her father walked out. Fluttershy then shook as she stared at the bathroom. Her father had tried to kill her. He would have killed her, but he didn't. Though she felt like she deserved it at that moment. She had killed her mother in cold blood. Death sounded exactly what she deserved. She backed out of the bathroom slowly, but she didn't want to be in that room anymore. She turned to the door in the hallway and quickly exited. She panted heavily outside of her mother's bedroom as tears refused to stop. She slowly hobbled forward, having difficulty in seeing where she was going. She reached up a hoof, touching what felt like a door. Without thinking, she pushed it open and stepped inside. You sewed it back together, huh? Her father said, looking sloppily at her sewing job her daughter had done with her favorite doll. Yes, sir, Fluttershy repeated meekly, lowering her head as her father held it. He wasn't impressed at all. The stitches were visible, the stuffing was still hanging out from spots of the non-sewn clothes enough, and the fibers would easily come loose if tugged on. Unacceptable, he said, before grabbing the doll and tearing it apart. Fluttershy snapped her head back up in shock as she watched as he tore apart all the seams and stitches. She had worked so hard on making the doll in one piece again, after he'd torn it up for the first time. Soon the doll lay in pieces of cloth and stuffing before her again. If you love it, I shall destroy it, he said sternly. Then it will be your job to put it back together, and if you can't do it perfectly, then you don't deserve it at all, he said, as he walked over to his bookshelf. Fluttershy whimpered as she began to pick up the pieces of her favorite, most beloved doll, Ashley. The book slammed itself before her, making Fluttershy almost jump. But she did read the title carefully, The Mastery of Sewing. If you don't want to see your doll destroyed, you will make it look perfect, her father said, before returning to his desk, going back to his work. Once she had all the pieces of her doll, Fluttershy carefully picked up the book with her mouth, carefully not to stain it with tears, as she quickly left her father's study. Fluttershy whimpered as she was in her father's study. She had wandered in there by accident, but now she had seen more of what she'd forgotten. She swallowed back more tears as she began to calm herself down. Her mind began to put things together. I wanted to see this. She breathed heavily, reminding herself that she had chosen to come here, and that she had told herself that there was no turning back now. I have to see every memory for my sake. She then took a deep breath, wiped her face of tears, before pushing back on the door to her father's study, exiting it. She stumbled out of the study a little, finding the kitchen that just lay on the opposite side of it. She steadied herself before walking into the kitchen. Haze returned as another memory resurfaced. What do you think you're doing? Her father yelled loudly. Fluttershy dropped the box of cereal that she had picked up from the top of the counter, her wings snapping shut to her sides as she fell a few feet before landing on the ground with a thud. Her father was furious as he stormed up to her. Fluttershy tried to go back to get away out of fear. He grabbed her hoof and forced her eye level with him. What have I told you about flying without permission? You're not allowed to even do it even in the house, he yelled at her, gripping her hoof hard. I'm sorry, she cried out, as tears streamed down from her face. Her hoof did hurt like crazy as he gripped it hard. I've told you before, bad fillies who don't listen to listen to what they're told, gets eaten by dragons. Do you want to get eaten by a dragon? No, no! Fluttershy cried out, struggling against his grip. Well, you're attracting a dragon flying by as a bad feeling. You must want to be eaten by a dragon. Why else would you be flying without permission? His screams made her ears feel like they wanted to burst. No, I don't want to be eaten by a dragon. I'm sorry, she cried harder. Well, you know what? I think I can hear a dragon. He's already pretty close because you've flown. Maybe I should just throw you outside so he can eat you right now, he hissed and growled. No, Daddy, please! I don't want to be eaten! Fluttershy wailed, afraid for her life. Well, if you don't want to be eaten, there's only one thing I can do, he said, tossing his daughter to the ground, the wind escaping her body as she tried to scramble to her feet, only for her father's hoof to step on her, holding her down. His mouth reached down, gripping on her wing hard, forcibly extended, despite all the efforts to shove it. No, Daddy, please stop! She cried out in pain as it shot for her back, but it was too late. He wasn't going to stop. Crack! Fluttershy cried louder than she ever could before her. Father snapped her wing. There now, you won't be flying for a while, and you won't attract any dragons, he simply said, stepping off of his wailing daughter. I snapped it carefully so you'll be able to fly once it's healed. But we'll have to get you to the hospital to put a cast on, he said with a grin forming his face. Though only a dragon once the dragon is left. Fluttershy then heard her father's words pass through the screams of agony from the burning pain that echoed from her wing. Fluttershy gulped down into tears once more, trying to hold herself back from crying. She slowly backed out of the kitchen. My father, he was cruel, she whimpered softly to herself. I can't believe that I made myself forget this. It's all too painful to remember. She shut her eyes, another tear escaping, despite the force herself not to cry. She struggled with her hooves, trying to make herself continue forward, past the kitchen to the living room. She could see the front door from where she knew where she needed to head there. Her instincts told her so. However, the living room held one more memory she had to see. The haze returned as the memory came to her once more. Where did you get that? Her father asked the filly Fluttershy walked into the door, carrying a candy bar in her mouth. Oh, a colt at school gave it to me, she said quietly. He said that he liked me and he wanted me to have it, she said gently, chewing on the other end of the bar, savoring the sweet taste. Oh, did he? Her father walking up to Fluttershy. Fluttershy looked up at her father, taking a step back from him getting too close. Fluttershy fell to the ground as her father's hoof hit her hard across the face. The candy bar slid across the room. Let me tell you something about boys loving you, he growled, grabbing Fluttershy by the mane and picking her up, electing yelps from the pain from the filly. Colts will only hurt you. They only think about themselves, and they want nothing more than to see you suffer, he grinned wickedly. After all, look at me. I love you, and here I am hurting you, he said, before tossing his daughter across the room, her landing against the hard floor. Fluttershy cried as she tried to curl up into a ball, not wanting to be hurt anymore. But I suppose you must really like being hurt, and if you're going to let a colt like you, who, her father grinned, walking up to his daughter, kicking her in the back, causing her to cry in pain. Any colt that gets closer to you will do nothing but hurt you. So I hope you enjoy this for the rest of your life. And I'm sure you'll find a colt who loves you more than I do. Her father laughed before walking off to his study. Fluttershy whimpered and cried as she curled up, remembering the colt from school that had given her the candy bar. Suddenly her mind filled with anger and hate for the colt who had already given her the candy bar. All she wanted to do was hurt her. He wanted to get close to her so he can make her cry and suffer, just like her father did. I hate colts, Fluttershy whimpered out loud. She vowed herself that she would never like a colt, or let a colt like her for as long as she lived. Another lump came to Fluttershy's throat. My father, he made me hate colts, she thought to herself. But I don't hate them. She knew better now. Not all colts were like her father. Not all of them would hurt her just because she got close to them. But still, he had never had interest in being with a colt. The only pony she had fell in love with was Rainbow Dash. Do I love Rainbow Dash for her because she was the only pony who got close to me? That didn't hurt me? Fluttershy found herself confused by her own feelings now. Everything she had believed turned upside down for a single moment. It felt like she had been lying to herself all this time, and that everything she had done might have been a mistake. No, she suddenly said to herself firmly. Because of Rainbow Dash, I came to Ponyville. I escaped from my father. I met with the best friends I've ever had. Friends who care about me more than anything else. I fell in love, had a wonderful relationship. She then looked up at the ceiling. The thoughts of her friends came to her mind. She remembered so many moments together with her friends, picking flowers, going to parties, playing games, sleepovers, tea parties, hanging out, adventuring. She'd done so much with her life now, even if she had forgotten about her foalhood because it was too painful, and it hadn't stopped her from moving on with her life. From her experiencing all the wonders she had to offer. If anything, because her father pushed her away, she found her to embrace the ponies that truly loved her. She took a deep breath as she calmed down. A small smile came on her face. Yes, even though this all happened, I still have my friends, she said, a warmth sparking inside her heart. It gave her legs strength. She walked through the living room up to the front of the house. All she could see was a lock on the door, the lock on the symbol of the doll on it. She carefully reached into her bag and pulled out the key with the doll symbol. The key picked up a while ago still had. She carefully placed the key into the lock, the door letting out a click to let her know that it worked. She carefully pushed open the door and walked through. Once on the other side of the large open room, almost like a small gymnasium, she walked forward towards the middle of the room, where she'd stop. A black fire was burning on the opposite side of the court. The fire slowly grew, raising up to the shape of a pony, before red eyes appearing on its face, a white mouth opening. It was a dark creature. Fluttershy had stared at the creature. She didn't feel heavy, overbearing presence this time. The creature was still drawing near from her heart, but it wasn't overwhelming her now. She could stand before this creature now. The creature had slowly turned itself around, showing its back to Fluttershy. Fluttershy then looked at the creature curiously, not sure of what it was doing. As it turned around, she could see what it was hanging from its mouth was the body of Rainbow Dash. Fluttershy let out a gasp as the creature flickered its head, tossing the body towards Fluttershy. It landed before her, hitting the ground with a thud. Fluttershy reached out her hoof gently and nudged the body. It was cold. Rainbow Dash was dead, killed by the creature before her. Fluttershy stared at the body for a long while, the creature watching her, grinning as it waited. Fluttershy moved her hoof away from her body, a sad look appearing on its face. She looked her head upwards towards the dark creature. "Father," she spoke softly. "I understand now." She made sure she spoke clearly. "I've done a horrible thing, and it's likely that I could never be forgiven for what I've done. I can't bring the dead back to life, and the blood from my mother is on my hooves." Fluttershy closed her eyes for a moment, taking in a deep breath, before she continued. "I probably deserve all the punishments I've received. No fool should ever do what I did, even though it may have been through living with that I did receiving punishments for my deed. I lived with everything." She smiled softly. "And I've grown up to a wonderful life. Now I've left it all behind, all the things that made me sad, that hurt me, and that made me miserable living at home. I have wonderful friends, animals that depend on me, a home I can take care of myself. I found love that didn't hurt me." She smiled softly. Fluttershy carefully stepped over the body before her, walking up closer to the dark creature. The smile of the creature faded as it looked down on her, as if not amused. Fluttershy then came to a stand just inches before him, looking up at him, smiling. "You brought a lot of pain to me, but I forgive you." She then leaned her muzzle against the chest of the dark creature. The creature let out a roar. "I forgive you for everything. I thank you. Thank you for letting me find a wonderful life." An orb of bright light that appeared to be of air above the two, flowing down towards Fluttershy. The dark creature let out a roar in pain as the light gently floated past him, reaching Fluttershy's chest. The light engulfed her body, filling her up with a pleasant warmth. The bandages that covered her body began to unfurl, Each bandage was pulled away from her body, pulling around her as her body recovered. Her wings extended out. She stood on her legs. She opened both her eyes to look up at the roaring creature. It seemed to be fading away by the light that shined. The very existence of the creature seemed to be fading away, burning up in the light that surrounded her. The last bits of darkness was made up as the creature disappeared, as the light began to slowly fade. Fluttershy smiled as she looked down, seeing her own chest in place of the lantern was now a golden necklace with a pink butterfly-shaped jewel. For a moment her necklace glowed once more. A beam of light shot out, creating a doorway right before her. Fluttershy looked at the doorway of light, knowing what it was. "So this is my way home now," she said, looking at the door. Once she passed through the archway of light, she would leave this world. She'd go back to Ponyville. She'd be there to take everything she had learned and live a better life than she ever had before. "I can't leave just yet," she smiled at the doorway before her turning around and away from the light. "I have my two friends who are lost and need my help." Pinkie lay on the ground, panting in pain and exhaustion. "Haha, you've been running away for oh so well, you're good at it." The other Pinkie Pie smiled towards Pinkie. "You've killed me 3 times, and yet here I am again. You must really want to be a part of my parties." The other Pinkie laughed. Pinkie Pie can only sob. The other Pinkie was wanting to kill, and she wouldn't stop her. It was the point of trying to stop her. She let Fluttershy get separated twice now. She was probably dead, and now with the injured, she had been. And Rainbow Dash hated her. What was the point of trying to stop her other than killing when she was guilty of it herself? "I'm sorry, Bellamina," Pinkie sobbed, closing her eyes. "Oh well, I guess I'll have to take my time playing with you." The other Pinkie smiled, picking up the butcher's knife as she drew closer. "Now just hold it right there for a minute," came a motherly demand. Pinkie and the other Pinkie snapped their heads towards the doorway they were in. Stood there a yellow Pegasus pony with long pink hair, wearing a golden necklace. "Hasn't your mother ever told you it's not nice to hurt other ponies?" Fluttershy stomped across the room towards the other Pinkie. The normal Pinkie Pie was just staring with her mouth agape. "Yeah, but I'm not really hurting them. I'm playing with them." The other Pinkie laughed, putting down her butcher's knife to talk to Fluttershy. "That's not how you play nice with other ponies." Fluttershy stood right up to the other Pinkie, looking at her straight in the eye. "You are going seriously to hurt my friend. If you don't know how to use knives or sharp objects when you play nice games, like pin the tail on the pony or bobbing for apples, you should know better than this." But the other Pinkie began to protest. "No buts. You should be ashamed of yourself. I have half of a mind to tell your mother that these kind of games you've been playing with other ponies." The other Pinkie Pie seemed to be shrinking back under the scolding of Fluttershy. "Now that you're going to take your little things and get rid of them, and I never want to catch you ever doing this again. You got that?" The other Pinkie Pie could only nervously nod her head yes rapidly before picking up her butcher's knife, turning and running away from Fluttershy. "That's a good second, Pinkie Pie." Fluttershy smiled happily, seeing the other Pinkie ran off, before turning to the Pinkie who was staring in shock at Fluttershy. "How was that? I was so assertive." Fluttershy softly chuckled, as she felt a happy shiver go down her spine. Pinkie stared. It took a long time for her to even register what was going on, but once it dawned on her that Fluttershy had just scared her other half away, a smile formed on her face. It quickly began to grow, before the sound escaped her lips. Pinkie began to laugh. She laughed so hard, rolling onto her back as her hooves flailed in the air. Fluttershy had just scared away everything that her ever scared her to the core, and she had done it by just being Fluttershy. Pinkie couldn't help but laugh as her hair poofed out to its usual curls, and it was the funniest thing she's ever seen. "Thank you," Fluttershy said, smiling, giving a small bow to Pinkie, accepting the laughs as a compliment. Oh, Fluttershy," Pinkie laughed, finally rolling back to her hooves and rushing up, hugging her dear friend. "And you're all better, and you saved me," Pinkie laughed joyously. "Hey, what are friends for, Pinkie Pie?" Fluttershy grinned, returning the hug. "Oh, and speaking of friends, have you seen Rainbow Dash?" Pinky asked, looking at Fluttershy with concern again. Don't worry, I found you first, but we're not leaving until we find her. Fluttershy smiled. Alright, Operation Locate Dashie is a go. Pinkie Pie smiled happily, saluting Fluttershy. Is it really for the best? A cold voice said. Yeah, it's what I've always wanted after all. Rainbow Dash tilted her head, closing her eyes as she agreed. Well, I'm glad to see you've been able to follow your true heart then, the voice laughed. Rainbow Dash opened her eyes and looked at the pony that stood before her. She looked like it had been one of the Shadow Bolts, the flying team she had seen in Everfree Forest the day they'd taken down Nightmare Moon. It's what I've always wanted to do. No point on changing that now, Rainbow Dash said, slowly looking around. The two of them were sitting in the middle of the burning building, the fire staying just far enough away not to burn them. Good then. Just let me take my hoof and everything I'll make will be clear, the Shadow Bolt said, holding out her hoof to Rainbow Dash. Rainbow Dash looked at the hoof hesitantly. It didn't feel good. It didn't feel like the right thing to do, but she felt like it was the only thing she could do anymore. She slowly raised her hoof, reaching out carefully to take the Shadow Bolt's hoof. Dashie! Came in an insanely cheerful voice, as suddenly Rainbow Dash was suddenly tackled from behind. Flattening her against the ground, the Shadow Bolt gasped loudly. What the? Hey, Pinkie Pie! Rainbow shouted, annoyed, still being embraced by the pink mare. Oh my gosh, I thought I lost you. After you ran off, I was so worried that I tried to tend to find you and Fluttershy, and I started running into monsters that I ran before. Man, I was so desperate. Because of what you said, I couldn't help but start to relieve that nightmare here. But it's all okay now, because I forgive you, and now that I found you again. Pinkie cried out cheer happily once more. Yeah, that's great, Pinkie Pie. But you're crushing me, Rainbow groaned as she tried to sit up. Pinkie finally sliding off her. Oopsie, sorry about that, Pinkie laughed. And what are you doing here anyway? I told you you were supposed to find Fluttershy. Rainbow Dash stopped herself as she went wide. Fluttershy! Oh my god! I totally forgot! Rainbow said, looking around rapidly. What am I doing here? I have to find Fluttershy. It's okay, Dash. I'm already here. Fluttershy smiled happily. Walking towards the burning the room of the hallway Pinkie had just ran throughout the blinding speed. Fluttershy, you're okay! Rainbow said, galloping over and hugging Fluttershy. What was I thinking? You were right in front of me not too long ago, and I completely forgot. I had to protect you. Fluttershy laughed, hugging Rainbow Dash's back. It's okay, Dash. This place does have a lot of weird things to a pony. Hey, the Shadow Bolt yelled, standing up and glaring at the free mares before her. All three of their heads turned to Shadow Bolt. What about your dreams? You won't accomplish them if you don't come with me, she growled. Rainbow then looked at Fluttershy. Fluttershy smiled back before Rainbow Dash grinned and turned at the Shadow Bolt. Tell you what, keep it for now. I'll find a way to achieve my dream on my own. The Shadow Bolt yelled before turning off and putting a black smoke, disappearing into the burning building. And don't come back, Pinkie yelled happily, waving the puff of black smoke. Fluttershy, I'm so sorry, Rainbow Dash said again. I shouldn't have let this place get to my head and forget about protecting you. Dash then turned to Pinkie Pie, who was only smiling at Rainbow Dash. And Pinkie, I'm sorry I yelled at you. That wasn't right of me when you were only trying to help. That's okay, Dashie. I forgive you, Pinkie said, giving Rainbow another hug. Let's just focus on getting out of here. I can handle that, Fluttershy smiled happily. She turned herself towards the hallway that stood proudly. Her golden necklace began to glow softly, before releasing a beam of light that shot out before them. A doorway had formed their exit home. The necklace had around Fluttershy's neck, having served its purpose, turned back into an orb of light, floating up into the air before disappearing. Alright, let's go home, Pinkie smiled happily. Yeah, I'm kind of tired of this place, Dash grinned. All of us are, Fluttershy smiled. The three mares walked through the doorway of the light, together.